Happy Friday, guys, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Dubs. I'm your host, Bill T. Well, I'm back from the UK, and I've got plenty of podcasts to share with you guys kicking off this week. Although I had a lot of stuff going on in the UK, nailed down a bunch of podcasts while I was there. And before I got there, a lot of people were telling me about a Karmann Ghia that holds the record for the fastest naturally aspirated car. This car is owned by Martin Freidschröder, who is probably one of the most enthusiastic guys that I happen to meet all weekend. Now, he's the pilot of this car, the engineer behind it, and he's built most of the parts and pieces by himself with the exception of help from one of his friends for paint. It's a phenomenal car, tons of carbon fiber, tons of titanium, tons of really cutting-edge stuff. He has an engineering background, so he's a little bit of a maniac when it comes to designing and building his own stuff for his drag car. But this car is incredible. You're going to love this podcast because he is full of energy, super stoked, way positive, and I'm looking forward to seeing these guys here in December when they bring the car out from Vienna. So he's from Vienna, Austria. He's a great guy. I'm glad to say that I got to meet him, and we're definitely pals from now on. So I look forward to this podcast. I know you guys are going to enjoy it. I've got so much to tell from my trip in Europe that you guys that are watching on Facebook or seeing the information I'm putting out on social media. It was a blast. I'm going to do a recap of it. It's going to be one of the podcasts I know you guys will really enjoy. It was a trip of a lifetime, and I'm going to have a video of this coming out soon. So stand by for that, and I know you'll be stoked to see it when you do it. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, make sure you guys go now and subscribe to my YouTube channel at Let's Talk Dubs on YouTube. So go check that out today, and let's get into it, man. This week's podcast with Martin Freidschröder, Mexxspeed Ghia, Mexxspeed Racing on Let's Talk Dubs.
You probably don't know that there's a new Volkswagen out that doesn't look like a Volkswagen. It's got everything that people who like the bug like.
Okay, everybody. So today I'm at European Bug-In. We're here 2024, part of it's where the culmination of the Cowlook Caravan took place. And I've been hearing a lot of buzz about racers all over the world, especially with this Race of Champions coming up in December 7th in Las Vegas. And one of the guys I've been hearing a lot of talk about innovative technical stuff that he's been doing is Mex. Last name Mex.
Everybody calls me as Mex. It would be not the right one to spell the name because it's German name. It's hard for everybody to pronounce it. It's Freidschröder.
Oh yeah, Freidschröder
is always difficult.
No problem. So, and he's the pilot of Mexxspeed, the full naturally aspirated Karmann Ghia that's completely custom. He built everything. It's pushing real modern edge technology. I did a walkthrough with the car. We'll put a little video out that we did with him, and what we're going to do is we've got an interview with him today. And Mex, welcome to the podcast.
I'm really honored to be with you on the broadcast.
Usually the way we start the podcast is what's your VW story and how did you get into Volkswagens?
Let me think. So basically my first car in high school was a Volkswagen, but it was water-cooled, and so it was just a reliable, cheap, affordable car for me. And then basically a friend of mine, and he is actually the painter of my car, he showed me old VW trends from the 70s, so the very first issues, and he showed me all these Beetles, and then we brought new hot VW trends and hot VWs and VW trends, and then I caught fire, and it was easy to get Volkswagen Beetles over there. They were cheap. Nobody wanted them. Everybody wanted the air cool, the water cool, because they were more reliable, and so it was really cheap. And my first bug was a 72, and it was for like $20. So that's how I got into it.
$20 your first bug cost you.
Yeah.
That's pretty. That's a good price. Now, you got into drag racing with your first bug. How do you get into the racing part of things? Because how do you get into racing? What is the first time you go racing?
To be honest, I started with
Yeah.
I started with racing as a kid with RC racing, so radio
Okay.
controlled, and I was always a big fan of high RPM engines and high horsepower and this sound like a mosquito. This always was a thrill for me. So it was very quick when I got the Beetle to see all these performance parts that were available that I was checking out how to get them from the US, and then we started to build the car, and that's how I got into racing.
So do you remember any particular Volkswagen drag race car or any racing car that inspired you?
There were a lot of cars that inspired me. Maybe one of the not that usual cars was Chris Klingerman. He had a 1600 with over 200 horsepower, which was back those days in the 80s. This was close to impossible.
Yeah, yeah. And so some of those cars motivated you. Now you're in Vienna, right? You're living and growing up in Vienna, Austria.
Yeah, that's true.
And how many friends do you have that are into Volkswagens and all of this crazy
Basically,
things?
I had a lot of friends because I came into this community, but most of them had mild-tuned engines and then performance engines just to go around a little bit quicker, but nobody was really into racing. And so when I started racing and then got the car quicker and quicker, I was common for me to race versus the V8s, and with the V8s it was always really difficult, so I had to push really, really hard, and I rarely raced with the Volkswagen. Most of the time I raced with the V8s.
So you started out racing not in a Volkswagen circuit, just to go to like your Friday night test and tune and your local drag
We didn't have local stuff. We had some races in Germany, but this was later on. But most of the time I started just racing versus the V8s and versus the all-wheel drive Audis, the turbo cars, and this was a tough job.
I mean, if you're racing an all-wheel drive car, that's okay. Just turn the microphone like this and you're good to go. So racing all-wheel drive cars, that's a task. I mean, it takes a lot of work to be faster than an all-wheel drive car.
Because back those days we had non-prepped tracks, and this was a big advantage for these all-wheel drive cars. They had turbos, they had just to take care to get the boost up and launch with boost, and they were fast. And so, but still there was, when the tracks were shitty, it was an advantage with the back engine, with the rear engine, and with the rear drive. And if you had enough power and the car was light, it was possible to race them and to win races. Didn't win that often, but I won some. But it always kept me pushing hard to be faster.
And your first car, street car with a fast motor, and then you eventually move into building more specific drag car, or do you first build just a drag car?
Funny thing is, my first build was actually a Karmann Ghia convertible, which had a 2110 engine, and then I put it on nitros and I raced it up to close to the 10s, so it was running 11.2 and it was still a street car.
On a convertible Karmann Ghia?
Yeah. I was going to the races with the car and race there and going back again, so it had to be reliable too. And then there was the point when I realized you can race with them, but it gets harder and harder to win the races because you are at the point where this construction is close to the limit. And then I said, okay, let's build a race car without any limit. And that's when I jumped into this, how I like to call it, unlimited natural asperated. It's on nitro, so it's not really natural aspirated, but at least it's unlimited.
Now, the car that's behind us, the Mexxspeed Racing Ghia, how long have you been racing this car?
Let me think quick. I'm racing it since 2013 with this, so since 2010, so basically 14-15 years.
So 15 years, and now this car, the way it sits today, a lot of evolution, a lot of changes.
Basically, it's a build, then it's an ongoing development and improvement to get better and faster. Some things stayed like the engine displacement, because this is basically the biggest displacement that makes sense to be rigid enough on a Type 1 engine to make a lot of horsepower. But a lot of constructions had to go because they just kept me from being faster.
Now, the displacement of this motor is 3 liter. What is the bore and stroke?
So it's exactly 2977 cubic centimeters, so it's a bore of 4-inch 40, which is 1026, and the stroke is 90.
So 90 millimeter stroke. What type of crank is it?
This is a billet crank, custom billet crank from Scat.
Okay.
Tom Leap helped me a lot to get the crank I really want to have on my car.
Yeah. And this motor, now there's a lot of things going on with this motor. When you first had this setup, how fast was it running to how fast you run today?
To be honest, the first year I did just 3 races, and it was more fixing all these troubles you had if you have a whole build. But I was able to run a 10, and then in the next season I was quite happy when I ran the first 9. And then it took me quite a long time to get down to the 8, but basically I was the first who ran an 8 with a nitro-enhanced, natural asperated engine, air-cooled.
And so this motor, when you first started racing, you're running methanol when you first started?
I was always running methanol.
Now you've done a lot of evolution and experimentation with the methanol, because there's a lot of, my friend Johnny Osmondson runs a street car that runs on methanol, turbocharged, and we were talking, he changes the oil after every race because we talked about some things. Now you've done some things that are really different on your car. Now you've custom manufactured your own cylinders and cooling fins on the cylinders, and then custom made your own cylinder heads. Is that correct?
What I really realized that methanol, it has some good advantages, like keeping the air-cooled engine cool and thus reliable. But the nasty thing, it dilutes the oil and it rusts the cylinders. But I realized really quick, if you keep the oil hot enough that the methanol cannot stay in the oil because it evaporates, the problems are just gone. So what I started is just preheating the oil, and this keeps the oil nice and clean. And as long as the oil is hot enough, before you start the engine, you don't need that much fuel for a cold start, and it's much easier and keeps the whole engine more less maintenance.
Now you told me something really unique about the oil in this engine, because I asked if you change it every run. The oil in this engine, what is the oil in this engine?
I have to say 2 things. There's a lot of oil in this engine, so it's a tri-sump tank, and it can keep up to close 3 gallons, so it's a lot. So and I don't change it regularly, so this oil is in since 2 seasons and it's still nice, so why change it?
Now you've inspected the oil when you tried your theory about the evaporation, the preheated, because it makes sense, right? You preheat the oil, the methanol can't stay in the oil because it's too warm, it evaporates quickly when it touches it, so it doesn't dilute the oil. Is that what you're saying?
Because the bad thing is the dilution of the oil is, just imagine because the methanol doesn't really mix with the oil, it's just diluted.
Floats on top.
Yeah, and if you get a tiny drop of methanol into the oil and it goes through the oil gallery to the bearing, it evaporates immediately like an explosion and keeping the oil film away. It's like putting some carb cleaner on the bearing which are spinning, which is really not good for the bearings.
Right. And you've torn the motor down, you've inspected it, you've done all these things.
Yeah, I'm expecting it like once in a season and once off season. And to be honest, the main bearings and rod bearings which are in here, I kept them the last 4 teardowns, so it's working.
Really, the last 4 teardowns you've kept the bearings?
Yeah, I didn't touch the bearings because, to be honest, if a bearing looks good, it makes no sense to change it. It doesn't get better with a new one because it's just new.
Now, this motor, give me the setup on this motor. So we talked about it's 2997 cc.
2977, yeah.
And it's an autometer.
It's an Autocraft case.
Autocraft case.
Off the shelf, just a few modifications that Autocraft, big thanks to them, helped me to get done and delivered it to me. And then the cylinders are basically, I call them Siamese cylinders, so it's 1 cylinder block with 2 liners. The big advantage is you can easily change the liners. If there's something wrong, like corrosion, or if some scratches are in it, you can change every liner easily. And the cylinder block keeps it much more rigid, because the key to have a big naturated air-cooled engine that makes a lot of horsepower is you have big displacement, high RPM, and you have to have a really stable valve train to go that high RPM, because it's always the valve train that limits because of the lift and of the aggressive cam, because if the rocker setup and the cylinder head is not stable enough, you cannot reach valve lifts that are high enough to make the big power at high RPM. And therefore the cylinder block helps a lot because it keeps it more rigid.
Now, with designing your own cylinder heads, it wasn't a heat issue, it was more of a design issue. Now how different design are these cylinder heads than the best aftermarket head you could buy, which would be what, like Autocraft heads, or what?
I was running Autocraft block, I was running Autocraft heads, and I was happy with them until a certain point, a certain value of nitros, then I keep them torching, because I read this sentence once: cast ain't fast. You reach a limit with the casted earlier than with a billet.
And so running it, normally with billet heads, it'll have a lot more heat soak on a regular engine, but with this, because you're running methanol, you're not concerned about the heat.
Exactly.
So you're able to have the heads manufactured out of billet aluminum.
Yep.
What are the things that you took into consideration when you were going to design your own head? What were the most important things to you?
I tell you, the most important thing and the most different than anybody else, it's not about flow numbers, it's about two key things. One thing is that it has a really rigid, stable valve rocker stand mounts, so it keeps the valve train really stable. And the second thing, each cylinder has 7 bolts, so there is 1 bolt underneath the exhaust, which is the hottest section, therefore the most heat expansion, and this is the area where you always blow the head first if it's turbocharged or on nitros. And just to keep that section supported, you don't need that much torque. If you have many bolts, it's always better than if you have less bolts with a lot of torque, because you just distort the head.
Right. So when the cylinder head, the crankcase is fitted for 6 studs on the head?
7.
7 studs. From the factory, or you modified it?
The case is like off the shelf, it's with 6 studs, and the 7th studs is from the head to the cylinder housing. It doesn't touch the case. It's just from the head to the cylinder housing to keep it together.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So it's a short stud.
Yes, sir.
Interesting. You've done a lot of really unique things. Now, where do you get your thought process comes from? Where? In other words, because you're looking at what everybody. It's easy to go fast, to go to the next guy's pit, see what he's doing, copy what he's doing, and hope it works. But you seem to me as a guy who's got a completely different methodology of thinking. Like, what is your thought process?
What I always tell people, there are only 2 kinds of R&D. Either research and development, that's the hard way, or rub and duplicate. That's the easiest way. But the research and development, if it's done right, it's first. And where do I get my ideas from? I told you before, I'm doing a lot of driving with my company car, and as soon as I'm in traffic jam, my brain switches off, and I'm thinking about technical solutions and how to improve whatever, and all these technical details and stuff. And probably I'm the only guy who's really smiling in traffic jam, because it makes me smile when I have ideas which I can realize and which proves me to be right, because it works.
Now, you've also designed your own throttle bodies on this, and you're one of the few people that I know of that has above the throttle, like a TBI injection, right?
Like a standoff injection?
Like a standoff throttle body, like the Chevys. They had the 2-barrel carburetor with the overhead injectors, similar, right?
To be honest, if you look at the motorcycles and the rally cars, it gets quite common nowadays.
Oh, really?
Really, the fast motorcycles, they have like Ducati, like Yamaha, they all have standoff injection. That gets common.
And now with this, you've done a lot of really unique things in this car from front to back. Now I want to stay on the motor for a little bit. So throttle bodies are custom made.
Yeah.
Now, did you change the intake manifold angle?
To be honest, what we tried to is to have a nice flow path from the entry of the velocity stack to the valve, and from the valve to the center of the combustion chamber, because everybody's talking about the runner, but the combustion chamber is basically the bell mouse of the runner. So it has to match, and we were really trying to circle it down to the center of the manifold, to the center of the combustion chamber, and that's why the manifolds are angled, and this gives a radius which closes down and tries to focus it to the center of the combustion chamber.
Now, do you think the part of the idea behind that is to get the fuel evenly around the valve so you have an even burn and burn more complete fuel versus having hot side and cold side to a piston? Or
the thing is, it's all about volumetric efficiency. The better you can fill the cylinder, because you have a given value of displacement, and the better you can fill that displacement, the more efficient gets the engine. It keeps the volumetric efficiency up.
there's also one thing that's quite unique on your throttle body. Your throttle body, where you've got your
Butterflies.
Your butterflies. Now, explain the difference on your throttle body pivot points versus most other people's.
There are many things that are different, but one thing which I really like to explain is the butterflies are billet butterflies, shaftless, and they have a nice design. So because they have no shaft, and the thing is, what we realized, if the butterflies get really big, they are a little bit snappy to drive because if you open them just a few degrees of angle, it's a lot of airflow. What we did, we didn't keep it a straight bore, we kept a ball, and the throttle, the butterfly is in the ball, and when it opens, it just opens versus the radius of the ball, so you have to open it more degrees to get the airflow. This makes it nice to drive off idle. And if the throttle plate is on wide open throttle, the cross-section area of the bowl copes the area which is taken by the butterfly. So it
compensates. It compensates for the thickness. Now, you said they're throttleless. The throttleless shafts.
It's shaftless.
It's butterflies.
It's one piece. It's a butterfly with two bearings on it, and it's one piece. It's not a shaft.
Oh, so it doesn't have a shaft in the middle. It has end mounts on it, so that are countersunk into the. Yeah. Good grief! You're coming up with a lot of stuff, but you know it makes sense when you think about it, right? And now I totally understand the philosophy you're saying. With such a big throttle body, when it starts to crack open, you're now letting so much air in, it starts to stumble. So you got to dump more fuel, which gives you that stutter.
And to be honest, I like to drive the car to the beam, and it should be easy, not that snappy.
Yeah. Now, the injection setup you've had on here, you've had for how long?
Sorry?
The setup for the injection you've had on here is how long?
We had the injection in the bottom, squirting directly on the top of the valve, as usual for everybody. And then we tried on the dyno if we can improve it, if we move it up, because there is a common sense that, especially on alcohol-injected cars, on high RPM, it helps to go further above to give the alcohol the chance to evaporate, because it is common sense that every droplet of the alcohol that enters the combustion chamber is just lost for combustion, and it just keeps some space you could use for combustion. And so by moving it up, it took some time on the dyno, because we were dynoing it first with the injections down, and we tried to find the right lengths with the trumpets, and when this was perfect, we moved them up, and we found from moving them from down to up, we found like 19.8 horsepower. And the most interesting thing for me was we even had to remove a little bit of fuel. It was not much, but we had to remove fuel to find more horsepower, which just makes the engine more efficient, because we didn't waste alcohol in the liquid state through the combustion chamber.
And so now to explain to me guys that are thinking like, what the heck's he talking about? So moving the injector from squirting in below the throttle bodies, moving it up above, gives the methanol a time to let the alcohol. So the alcohol is the delivery agent in the methanol?
No, methanol is alcohol. It's the same.
So methanol, alcohol is the same, but so what they talk about.
The thing is, let me tell you, gas,
right?
It's a much smaller amount, because if you are running the same horsepower on gas or on methanol is more than double the amount, and it takes more energy to evaporate. So it takes more time to evaporate, and you have to give it the time give it a chance to get completely evaporated when it enters the intake valve.
So, getting back to making sure that the listeners understand what we're talking about, when you move that throttle body, that the injector position from below the butterfly to shooting above the trumpets, squirting down overhead, above the trumpets into it. I watch it, you'll see a video that I have on it. It's really wild looking. But when you did that, that's 20 horsepower.
19.8 is close to 20.
19, I'm going to say 20 because
Okay.
we're rounding up. We're using the metric system. We're rounding up, so.
To be honest, I prefer to have precise numbers because it's always 20 and 100 and 500 horse, and
Right.
none of them has 500.
Now, with the motor that when you found that change in horsepower, how long was that process that it took?
It's an ongoing development to find horsepower.
Right.
Yeah.
But just from on the valves, setting up the valve, the overhead squirter, what has been the process with that? Because one of the things about your car is you've really designed the car to be easy to access, work on, and everything come apart, quick disconnects everywhere, even on the high pressure fuel lines, everything, which is amazing because you look at Chevrolet, all these car manufacturers, you have to have a special tool to take it off, and you just have a quick disconnect. I mean, I watched you pull your nitrous bottle out in about less than a minute, real quick, to do a swap if you needed to. Your philosophy with this, are you just constantly intrigued by when you do something that takes more than a few seconds, you're tired of it and you want to know a faster way to do it, or what?
To be honest, I'm mostly inspired from aviation, or from a lot of these fittings come from like chemical production, because these are really, really well designed stuff, and it's always nice to work with these well designed fittings than with like you need different wrenches and hold with one wrench and open with the other wrench. It's a waste of time.
So back to your induction system, all your trumpets and everything, what size are the throttle bodies that you
Throttle body is 64 millimeter.
64 millimeter throttle body. Have you experimented with larger throttle body than this?
It's very easy. The larger you get the throttle body, the more horsepower you do. It's getting less and less, but you always find power with making larger throttle bodies.
Who's running bigger than 64 millimeter right now that you know?
I've seen running 3-inch, which is 76 on 2-liter Hondas.
Well, in the Volkswagen world.
You don't have to ask me that question. I don't know.
Yeah, you haven't seen anybody running like this large of.
Let me tell you the other way around. I haven't seen anybody else making close that horsepower.
What are you running for horsepower on your motor?
The engine makes natural asperated 439.6 horsepower.
Not without power.
Without
adder.
nitrous.
400 and what?
And 39.6
On the dyno.
on the dyno.
And you have what shot of nitrous on there?
The nitro is designed up to 300 horsepower. If I will run the 300, I don't know. But
Have you dynoed it? You can't use
never,
nitro.
We tried it 2 times on the track, but the traction was not good enough. So, but we will start the first time. Maybe it will be like in 4 weeks. We're coming to a really good track, and then we will start with like a small shot of 160 horsepower.
So now the bigger question is getting the power to the ground. You can make all the power you want in the world if you don't hook up.
It's
and
about
get
the power to the ground that
Correct.
makes it fast, not at the engine.
So I notice you do not have a Beetle transmission in this car. What happened with the Bring me through the steps of where you started the Beetle transmission and what was the first transmission you put in the car? You never did a Beetle?
No.
You just did what, Type 2?
No. The first transmission was a tiny Porsche 901 transmission, which I was running really successfully, and it had even synchro hubs, and I had to shift to clutch it during shifting, which got annoying because if you tried to shift really quick, you always were killing the synchro hubs. And then I said, come on, I have to shift 3 times and it always takes half a second. I'm losing 1.5 seconds of acceleration, so I need some gearbox that gives me the ability to accelerate the whole run from the starting line to the finish line.
And the problem is a lot of guys in those type of fast cars, they'll use like a 2-speed, right? But on a naturally aspirated, it takes too much power.
You can't do that.
Because you can compensate
with
with the
ratio.
boost.
You need,
right.
Yeah, you need close ratio. They have just too many horsepower, so they can waste horsepower. We don't have that. We have to have close ratio to keep the engine in the happy power band.
And so what did you use for transmission? After the 901, how many horsepower did you make with 901 and then you broke it?
The engine back those days had like 371 horsepower was the most powerful, and I was running 250 horsepower, so close to 600.
Oh, wow. And so it ran for quite a while with that transmission.
Yeah, but to be honest, at the end, the engine was more reliable than the gearbox, and the gearbox took more maintenance, and I always had to pull the engine just for the gearbox, and I said, no, I have a really reliable, engine that needs not a lot of maintenance, and I put a lot of maintenance in the gearbox, so I have to focus on the gearbox.
So now how come you didn't go with the Mendiola? A lot of people have Mendiolas.
Because I wanted to have a gearbox that can deliver power from the starting line to the finish line without any cutting, any interruption of the load.
And what's the matter with the Mendiola? I mean, from
you
your
have to cut the ignition when you shift.
Oh, you can't just speed shift this straight through.
You can speed shift, but you have to cut when you shift from one gear to the other gear. You have to cut it a few seconds that the gear goes in. If it's a few hundredths of a second, you have to cut. You have to unload the suspension and you have to load again. And this is on nitro on a really nice car. It's nasty. It always tries to torque steer, and so I said I need something seamless.
So what do you have for the setup in here?
This was basically inspired from Craig Liberty. It's a Liberty gear. The style is like the Liberty gearbox from the Pro Stock V8. That's the inspirement, yeah.
And who built the transmission in this?
It started with when I was talking with Craig, and he said, "Why don't you put my gears in my gearbox?" And I said, "Because they don't fit." And he said, "I can make gears that fit." And it ended up that I made the gears, and he delivered the custom sliders, and I made a shifting mechanism that works, which probably took me like 3 years to get it well working. But right now it's working well, and it's really smooth to drive.
How many passes do you have on this transaxle?
I don't know, like 200.
And no issue so far.
I had a lot of issues in the beginning with the shifting, and it was a long development time to get these issues solved. But so far, the last few races, I had no issues. I broke the gearbox case because it's still a cast one, like 2 races ago. And the ring and pinion was hurt a little bit, so I had to replace it and replace the case, and it was a little bit a mess because it's a lot of work, because a lot of changes and some welding was done on that gearbox. But I could do it, and the last race was for testing, and now it's working again. It's basically the same, but it's just repaired.
So with the transaxle that's in here, it's all custom inside, or is there anything factory? I know the housing is a G50.
The housing is a G50, which is modified, and inside the bearings from the input shaft is stock. The bearing from the pinion is stock. The ring and pinion it's stock, but it's not from that gearbox. It's from the 6-speed gearbox because it's a little bit longer.
So it's a factory Porsche ring and pinion.
Yeah.
So you feel the transmission you've got pretty well dialed in. It's pretty solid at this point as far as for the horsepower you're using. Now, this car, you have you've got your personal best in this car is what?
8.68 on the quarter mile without nitrous.
And the nitrous you added when?
I added the nitrous 2 times, but I was not able to get a clean pass with the nitrous because it just got too wild for the track.
Now, the transaxle is geared tall or short gears in this? Because normally naturally aspirated is short gears, right?
It's tall gears because it's for the nitrous.
That's what so now you've got the room because you need legs to run with the nitrous, right? Yeah. So have you started, we talked earlier, you said you have a progressive nitrous injection that starts with
like 30% on the starting line, and ramps up in 1.5 to 1.8 seconds to full.
And wide open, it's in theory, going to give you 300 horse more.
Up to 300 more. So we will start with a level like 160 will be the starting line, and then we go up and see what makes sense. Yeah. All the people always believe, going up with nitrous level makes you fast. For sure, it makes it more difficult. If it makes it fast, is a different thing.
Now, using your theory about flow and all that stuff, does the nitrous injection interrupt any of that flow?
That's a funny thing, because what we did, we put a lot of development in that. I really have to thank Ria Morrison that gave me the chance to work on the wet flow bench, and we were testing the nitrous injection, where we put the injection at what angle that we could improve the flow by the flow of the nitrous.
Almost like it's pushing more through there with the nitrous.
Sucking it through. It works like a spray can.
Yeah.
If you put in a propellant that pushes out the paint, it's basically the same. We use the nitrous to propel the flow, because the engine just sucks the air in, and with the nitrous is pushed in, and if it's the right direction and right way, it sucks even more in.
So you made one pass today that you came here, and I watched the pass. You spun the whole way through first gear, easy.
I had to pedal it in the first gear, and I was lifting the throttle a little bit, and I was putting it down in the second gear, and at the end of the second gear it was on the floor, and then I could shift to the third gear, and then I keep the throttle floored, and yeah, the pass was smooth, but it just spin the first gear, and it was a 9.26.
And it wasn't a full throttle pass. It wasn't.
Not in first and second gear.
And so it's probably about what, 70?
We'll see.
70%.
Percentage is a percentage of what? So
right, percentage of guts.
Of the guts. Okay.
Of
So
not wanting to break the car.
I'm with you. It's like 75%.
So you feel the car is a lot faster than this. You're just trying to find the right track that this car hooks and books.
We'll push the limits on this track tomorrow and on Sunday. We'll see how far we can get, and in 4 weeks we have a really well prepared tracks where they are running top fuel, and this will be set up for nitrous.
So you're excited for that. Now there's still a lot more on the car. The axles. What are the axles? The axles for the car.
The axles are basically...
What store can I buy those axles?
You can buy them. It's not off the shelf. It's a custom part from Mark Williams.
Yeah.
They are from Forged 300M, and this is a big spline like the Pro Mods use, and the big 1430 U joints. So this is the biggest stuff you can probably buy.
So you don't think you're going to have an issue with those? They're designed for 1,200 horsepower. You're not going to break them.
The thing is, these U joints on the Pro Mods are before the axle, so they see less torque. On ours, they are on the wheels, where they see the torque with the reduction from the gearing.
Brakes on the car?
There are front brakes on the car.
Front brakes and rear brakes.
Yeah.
And anything special with the braking setup on it?
The brakings are basically from bikes. So the front is from the Ducati, the rear brake, and the rears are from the BMW. So they are really big brakes, and the calipers is Ducati Panigale. So this is really light, but quite nice stuff.
Now, the suspension we talked about, the transaxle. What about the shifting on the car? Talk to me about the shifting.
There's a vertical gate shifter, which is home built. It's made out of titanium to keep it light.
Hold on, home built. Whose home builds titanium?
Mine.
So walk me through how you, because they sell a vertigate shifter. Why wasn't a vertigate shifter good enough for you?
Because all verticate gate shifter you can buy are basically designed wrong.
How so?
Because if you see the shifting bomb from the hand, the force of the shifting goes over a pivot point and is going the other way around under the pivot point, and it should be above the pivot point to deliver the whole force without going through a pivot point.
So you're saying that the factory vertigate shifter is fighting itself?
No, it's not fighting itself, but the whole shifting is going through a pivot point, which is not necessary. You can mount the vertical gate, the gates, basically on top, and move it on top, then you have no pivot point where it's moving around.
And so the advantage of that is smooth and more effective shift, less force, more shift?
More efficient.
More efficient.
More efficient means you can make it smaller, lighter and less friction. And less friction means quicker shifting. And the thing is, we try to keep it really, really light. And even the shifting rods, because it's efficient, they are made out of carbon fiber. They're like 65 grams. So that's basically a lack of nothing. To keep it shifting really, really quick. Because on that full power, non-cutting shifting, the faster you shift, the less maintenance you have on the torque tools.
Now, any kind of tricks you've done with the transmission to free up horsepower?
Yeah, everything inside is micro-finished.
So micro-finished is what, for those listeners that don't know what micro-finishing is?
A kind of polishing that keeps friction from the gearing.
So what kind of horsepower are you freeing up from micro?
I don't know, but any I can free up is welcome.
So even if there's a possibility it might work, you're trying it. You're going to go for it. Now,
I can tell you my credo. Everything that is possibly to be done is the minimum you should start with.
so everything possible first, and then try to find what hasn't been done yet. Now, how are you shifting this car?
Basically, the first pass what I was doing right now, it was hand shifted, but the next one will be automatically shifted by the ECU. So I just can push the launch button, release it, launch the car, and the shifting is done by the RPM like a shift light. So when the RPM reaches like 9.1, it shifts. And when we can really go to the limit on the track, we will shift at 9.2.
Now, how does that shift setup work? Where it's controlled by a computer?
It's controlled by the ECU, yeah. It's
And
like a shift light. The shift light comes on, so the solenoid comes on the pressure bottle, pushes in via actuator the gears.
And you have an actuator for each gear?
No, I have basically an actuator for the equal and for the unequal gear. And by the ratio of the gear and the RPM of the rear axle and the RPM of the engine, the ECU knows in which gear, and then it knows which gear to engage.
So it just, is it like a sequential shifter? Or
It's a vertical gate, so first is front, pulling it back is second, pulling it forward is third, pulling it backward is fourth, putting it forward is fifth again.
So, and you're running 5-speed, because
Yeah.
to stay in the sweet spot of the power band, you have to have more gears.
The thing it was easier to build a 5-speed because it is a 5-speed gearbox, and there is even a 6-speed gearbox, and so there is enough room to put in the gears. And what we tried to make really wide gears, so the gears are more than an inch wide, just to keep the power.
Now, the oiling system in this car, you talked about it a little bit, but I want to talk about your preparation before you run the car. Now, you preheat the oil in this.
We preheat the oil more than necessary, and then we prime with the dry-sump pump to get the hot oil through the engine and wait until the oil on the return heats up. So we heat the engine with the preheated oil, basically.
And what temperature do you bring the oil to?
We heat the oil up to 100 degrees Celsius, and during this procedure it will cool down at like 20 degrees, then we heat it up again to 90, and then we start the engine. And when the engine is running, it cools down the oil because it heats the engine. But after like 2 minutes of running, the engine is in the right temperature and the oil is in the right temperature. You probably saw it when we fired it up.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to watch the process. You know, especially to watch the overhead injectors work, which is really
fires up really nice. Everybody blames methanol to be difficult to start with the right tune. It is not.
Right. I mean, this thing started like you primed it, you went in, you turned the key, and I don't even see you hit the gas.
There's not even a key. There's a button.
Oh yeah, you push the button, and you didn't get in the car to open the butterflies. Nothing.
Nothing.
Started and it fired.
And it's idling at 1,000.
Yeah, I mean, I was quite impressed when I saw it, because I've seen people that start these cars and they sound terrible at idle, and they sound like they've got to get over a choke point over 1,500 RPM before they do anything that sounds like a regular firing engine.
And just to imagine, this is the camshaft that has like 278 at 050 degrees. And like 0.935 lift on the intake.
Wow.
So it's quite an aggressive roller cam.
And And I mean, we saw it here. You'll see on the video. If you check out the video, there'll be links in the bottom of this podcast where you can look at the video. And this thing just idled nice and smooth. So it's pretty impressive. Who has told you, have a lot of people told you when you're going down this path that you can't do this or that's probably not going to work? Don't waste your time.
I was told a lot you can't do that. And a lot of people told me, I think this is not impossible. But I always try to tell the people, physics doesn't physics doesn't care what you believe. It's just physics.
So, what is in your time of experimenting and doing all this with this engine? What has been the most surprising thing to you that you've found out?
There were a few. Basically, I did not believe to find that much horsepower if we moved up the injectors. The second thing was I couldn't believe that it's firing up and idling so nice with the overhead injectors that are squirting on the closed throttle.
They are closed butterflies.
And it's rinsling down.
And it's squirting the top of them, and you're looking at it thinking,
and you see it rinsling,
you do.
swimming and rinsling down. I couldn't even believe, but the theory behind that is there's a lot of vacuum in it. There's a lot of vacuum in it, and you, at the very small slot where the air goes through, it's evaporated quickly. That's my theory behind, because it really fires up instantly and really idles nice. And everybody told me you can't do this without a second injector at the bottom.
Yeah, because everybody uses a second injector for idling, because we talked about that. Most EFI setups
and
have
I use that spot just for the nitros.
Yeah, yeah. They usually have a
small one,
an idle high program for idle, so they increase the fuel.
Not
and you
necessary.
actually on yours you had to decrease the fuel pressure.
That's not on idle. That's on warm up, because everybody has a warm up enrichment, and this car has even a warm up enleanment. So I try to start it up, and with the right ignition setting, I can even lean it out to get it warmed up really quick, because I just want. It's really hard for the engine, the warm-up process, because it needs more fuel, and more fuel means always fuel is rinsing down the cylinders and diluting the oil.
Now, we've talked about engine, transmission, the shifting setup that's in that. Who makes the shifting computer that you run? Like, is that
the shifting is done by the ECU.
What ECU you running
it's
on
Mexxspeed. Mexxspeed.
You're running a Mexxspeed on this?
Yes.
And who programmed?
Me and my crew chief, Jan.
So you programmed the Mexxspeed.
Yeah.
So this isn't a Motec, really expensive control stuff. It's Mexxspeed, and it's just signal
to be
in,
honest,
signal out.
The Mexxspeed, especially the MS3 Professional, it's quite advanced. People don't believe, but it's really quite advanced, and it does all the jobs. It does the fuel injection, it does the ignition, it does all the shifting, it does the nitros, it does traction control. So a Motec couldn't do more. So, and it does data.
I guess that's really a big plus for Mexxspeed, right? That you're running Mexxspeed on the fastest naturally aspirated nitrous injected car, right? That's kind of, you're in a class on your own, because you don't want to be held back by these silly rules, because your goal is, I want to get as much power as possible without adding a turbo.
As the word unlimited says.
That's it. Man, anything else that we didn't talk about you think that we didn't go over on the car?
About having a beer in Vegas.
Yes. You're planning to bring this car to Las Vegas.
We are really working on it to get it done.
I'm excited to see this car in Vegas. It would be great to see it on that track and to see the kind of performance this thing would get at sea level. We talked about some things. 2,000 above sea levels, what is over there.
I honestly hoping two things: that we can get it done, and that we can perform there like expected, to show the people the potential of that car.
Yeah, the biggest thing for you is going to be how much time you're going to be spending for test and tune, get some pre-runs, all that stuff. Because every time you go to a different track, you've got to compensate for elevation, track conditions, all those things.
It's a suspension setup. It's not about the engine setup, it's more about the suspension and the clutch setup.
Now I know you've got sensors all over the car. All that is also running directly through the Mexxspeed.
Yeah.
So all the traction you don't have, there's no traction control on here?
The traction control is basically just reducing the nitrous level. So natural asperated, I don't need any traction control, and just as a safety stuff, I reduce the nitrous level when the wheel spin gets too high, because I have speed sensors on the front wheels, on the rear wheels, and when the wheels, we always say 5 to 7% wheel spin makes you fast, everything more makes you slow, and over 10% I will start cutting the nitrous level.
And that's all built in the Mexxspeed. That's pretty impressive, and it's just a testament to how committed you are to making the best out of what you have without overcomplicating it, which I think sometimes is too difficult. People, they overcomplicate things.
To be honest, I always have to calm me down, because I have big problems to overcomplicate stuff. And to make more, and because I always see things and I know how you can make it better and faster, but sometimes it gets complicated, and then I have to rethink it and maybe make a half a step back.
Well, I tell you, I love the car. It's fantastic. It looks great. It's just a mean-looking monster. The
car or me?
Both.
Okay, got it.
But I mean, it just the setup, the build, you know, and you've done everything on this car yourself, right? I mean, short of paint.
Except the paint job, I helped a lot, but I'm not a painter, and I couldn't do that quality which should be on the car.
I don't think you could hold still long enough to have the patience.
It's hard, at least.
So, I mean, this is really a testament to how much you love this hobby and how much you really are committed to doing something.
Basically, it's not a hobby; it's my life.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fantastic. I love to see. Your enthusiasm is contagious, and when I was talking to you, I thought this is the greatest thing, man. I love people that their enthusiasm matches their commitment to the hobby, and that for you is, I see it 100%.
It's an honor to hear that from you.
Yeah. Well, I hope to see you in Las Vegas.
I don't hope it. I work hard
I will
on it.
see you in Las Vegas, and I will get you all the information as to how much time you got to test and tune and get things ready to go, because I want to see you. I want to see you on the track.
I will keep you attached.
Well, we will stay connected, my friend, and thank you for coming on the podcast.
It's a big honor for me.
Now, anybody you want to thank, any sponsors, any of that kind of people that have been helping you?
Too many people that I want to thank. I mentioned a few, like Tom Lee from SCAD, like Rhea Morrison, David Rhea, like for sure Darren Morgan, who helped me a lot with the development of the heads, for all my machine guys, and for sure my painter, who did a fantastic job. He's Toxic Tom, a good friend of mine, and there's a bunch more people that I thank, which I cannot mention now because just too many names. Well,
we'll for sure get you guys, there'll be a link to the video of all the video I've taken this car, plus some more, and it's definitely a car you want to see run. And if you're going to be in Vegas December 7th for the Race of Champions, make sure you come out and check it out, because Mexxspeed is going to be out there doing big things. So thanks for coming on the show.
I will try my best. Thanks a lot.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, if you like that podcast, and I'm sure you did, make sure you share this podcast with your friends. Anybody that's into VWs, copy and paste the link of what you're listening to right now and just share it to everybody. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram, as well as go subscribe to our YouTube channel. I do have some videos of my interview with my friend Martin, the Mexxspeed Racing. So if you want to kind of put a face to the voice, go check out my YouTube channel, and don't forget to subscribe while you're there. And with that, guys, I'm excited to bring you more podcasts that we did in EBI. There's lots of cool information we've got coming up. It's going to be Autocraft, the Schultz family from the Some Fun drag racing car. A lot of cool people that I talked to while I was at European Bug-In. So it's a great time to share and subscribe and make sure you don't miss an episode. So also remember, October 3rd to the 5th, one crazy weekend. Go to letstalkdubs.com, click on the show flyer on the main page, and secure your rooms now. It's going to be big. It's going to be rad, and I'm getting so excited the closer it gets. People are registering, so make sure you guys get registered for the show. Make sure you guys subscribe to George's YouTube channel at The Wagon if you want some cool how-tos on working on your Volkswagen and doing all types of tricks, mods, and maintenance to your Volkswagen. So that's it for me, guys. Until next week. Later.
You probably don't know that there's a new Volkswagen out that doesn't look like a Volkswagen.